Mixed methods research is more than just combining qualitative and qualitative research. Mixed methods is really about a mix. It's about blending together two different types of research methodologies as a better way to understand a research question. When you are coupling qualitative and quantitative designs, you are getting something more than if you were to just use qualitative or just use quantitative. You don't use mixed methods simply to have kind of pieces of both. You use mixed methods in order to enhance your research. We'll take a look at the next slide and talk a little bit about the combining of the two methods in order to truly get a mixed methods research design. I want you to think of mixed methods as a true combination of both qualitative and quantitative designs. The visual that you see shows two strands kind of running parallel, almost like a concurrent method. And sometimes that is the case, both the qualitative and quantitative happens at the same time, but it's not always, and we'll talk about different designs in a moment. But it's important to remember that it is a mix. It's without having both components, you're not going to be able to answer your research questions. So you have the qualitative piece that supports certain components of your research question and the quantitative piece. And you blend those together instead of just kind of throwing one in at the end or adding on another piece of qualitative information just to kind of call it mixed methods. A true mixed methods study is mixed methods from the very beginning, and it uses data from both methodologies to get to that research question. A moment ago, I was talking about the different strands, and some of the things to think about is the priority. So in some studies, qualitative may be given a little bit more priority than the quantitative. It may be hold more of a primary role, but you still have to have the other in order to answer your research question. The timing or pacing of the different strands, the quantitative or the qualitative data, may be different. In other words, you may do some qualitative data collection, some quantitative data collection, maybe then you go back to the qualitative, or perhaps it's happening concurrently. It may be that you do a shorter quantitative data collection period, and then you have a prolonged and longer qualitative piece. So that may be changing at all. The other thing that may change is when the data interfaces. So are you using the qualitative and quantitative data during the data collection? Is one of them informing the other? Does what you find in the qualitative portion impact how you then collect your data on the qualitative portion? Or does it happen when you are doing your data analysis? So you start breaking down the data and you start relying on the two strands to better understand the information, or is it how you interpret the results? Do you kind of look at it as a big picture in the very end after everything's been analyzed and then bring it together? So there's a lot of variation when we're talking about mixed methods. When you're thinking about why a researcher would want to use mixed methods, it's typically when, again, together, both those strands, the qualitative and quantitative, are going to provide more information than just one or the other in isolation. You may want to take all the great things about qualitative data, but you may need to strengthen that by adding some of the components of quantitative data. So you're really kind of boosting the study, if you will, to get something more robust. Or perhaps maybe just one type of data isn't going to give you enough of what you need. If you're doing a quantitative research study and you're looking at the impact of touch math on students with learning disabilities, you may be able to find that you're getting achievement scores, but perhaps if you're looking at the big picture, you want to know the effects of, maybe you want to look at their perceptions, maybe you want to measure their self-confidence, maybe you want to measure their self-efficacy. Those things you may not be able to do in a quantitative measure, so that qualitative piece is really what's going to give you that data. The last thing that is really helpful is that it's pragmatic, it's practical. You can get multiple viewpoints. It takes in subjective, objective data. It gives you a wider spectrum of information when you're using a mixed method study. This slide gives you some examples of mixed methods research, the different ways the data can be collected. You could do interviews and questionnaires. Now the questionnaires, of course, if the interviews are qualitative, of course, the questionnaires then would be quantitative. So don't think about a questionnaire being open-ended. So those could be your combinations. So you get information from a questionnaire and that from an interview, and that helps you then develop your questionnaire so that you know what questions to ask in the first place. Doing performance tests or achievement tests, so you're getting that raw data, and then you do some observations to follow up. Questionnaires, again, we're talking about quantitative data, and then you follow up with focus groups. You take the information that you got from that questionnaire and you start asking very specific questions about members of that group who took the questionnaire. Document analysis, let's say you're going to look at a lesson plan, performance test, you see how the students scored on the test that was generated from that lesson plan. You go do a questionnaire, you ask the teacher or the students how the lesson went, how well they were prepared, and then you do interviews that follow up on the questionnaire. So in that example, you can see you're kind of flip-flopping back and forth between qualitative and quantitative. Any of these are okay, and really this is just the tip of the iceberg of combinations of mixed methods studies. So here's some mixed methods research questions. How do the interviews with teachers, principal, university consultants help to explain any quantitative differences in achievement for middle school and junior high school students? So this is procedural. So really, and this wouldn't be a research question, but it would be a question that would guide why you would use the mixed methods. So if you are looking at achievement scores, how do the interviews that you're going to add to those achievement scores add to explaining what's happening within the school? Or how do the themes mentioned by the teachers help explain why middle school children score lower than junior high students? So again, here you're looking at understanding a phenomenon. You have to start with the scores because that's going to give you the foundation for what you're comparing, but then you're going to add to that and trying to understand it by doing these interviews or focus groups. Some of the advantages of using a mixed methods design is that you get a chance to take different approaches when you're collecting the data, when you're doing your data analysis, when you're drawing your conclusions, because you have touched on both quantitative and qualitative aspects. And it really does open up a lot of doors for you in terms of the actual data that you can get your hands on. So you do get the strengths of both strands of research. It doesn't limit what you're working on and what you can collect, because you can kind of get your hands dirty with the number aspect and the quantitative and run your stats, but then you can also dig deeper to understand the phenomenon behind the numbers. Mixed methods kind of naturally uses triangulation, and so what that does is it enhances that credibility of your research, because you're saying, okay, we have this quantitative data, we have this qualitative data, and it's saying the same thing. And me as the researcher, I'm going through and I'm doing these interpretations, and so we can see that the data supports itself within the study. Some of the disadvantages to mixed methods designs is that really you have to be good at both. You have to be a good quantitative researcher and know your stats and know how to run your statistical measures. And you also have to be a good qualitative researcher and understanding how to develop themes and codes to conduct interviews. I have a lot of colleagues who are very, very good at research, but a lot of them are very good at one or the other, and they're actually frightened by the other. So my colleagues who are qualitative researchers don't want to touch the quantitative data, and vice versa. My colleagues who are quantitative researchers are absolutely petrified by the qualitative research side. So you do have to be comfortable with both, or a lot of times you'll see that researchers do collaborate and work together. So you'll get the strength of a good qualitative researcher, the strength of a good quantitative researcher, and together they kind of make magic. Mixed methods also does take longer for the data collection and analysis, and that should be obvious because you're getting multiple sources and it takes you longer to kind of triangulate that data and work your way through kind of two sets of data, if you will. One of the limitations is that it's really common for people to say that they have a mixed methods design, even though one method may just be an add-on. Let me give you an example. If I were conducting a qualitative focus group, I was going to do a qualitative focus group, and I'm going to look at 10 groups of 4 students, and we're going to talk about why teachers go into education. And I'm finding that people are saying the same thing. So what I do is, after I'm done, I give them a little survey about their satisfaction with education. And it really didn't answer my research question. It may have just kind of given me a little bit more data, but I didn't use that information to guide my interviews, and my interview didn't guide me to develop that questionnaire. So it's kind of, each of those are standalones. Sometimes you'll also see a quantitative study where teachers will do, or researchers will do interventions, and at the end they say that they do interviews with the students to see if they liked it, and then they'll say it was mixed methods. Well, it's not really mixed methods. You did a quantitative study and you did some social validity at the end, and social validity being, you know, what does the student think? What the student thinks doesn't change the intervention, and the intervention wasn't really guiding your interview questions about what the student thought. So just be cautious that when you're reading a mixed methods study, you should really see the two strands together from the onset of the research. I'm going to go through a couple different types of designs. And again, although some of these you'll see that the designs are kind of one stage than the other, remember, this is the way that the study is designed from the onset. So as the researcher is going into the process, they have already decided, I'm going to do, this qualitative piece first, and that will dictate what my quantitative piece will be. It's not kind of an add-on. So the first one is sequential explanatory designs. In this, you do quantitative data, you collect some quantitative data, and then you follow up with some qualitative. So an example is use a questionnaire to get students' attitudes about drug testing programs, and then based off of what you get from that information, then you do several in-depth interviews with specific students about their attitudes. So you're using the information from the questionnaire to answer you. This is appealing to quantitative researchers because it's pretty straightforward. You implement it in 2 phases. And this lends itself to kind of an emergent research design. So if you're not sure what you're going to find, this is a good design to have, because you can kind of get that initial data and then kind of snowball or kind of pull out of that what you want to move into with the qualitative piece. It does take a lot of time because you do have 2 different phases, and so you have to figure out, what you're going to look for in your quantitative piece with your survey, and then who you're going to want to talk to. So the researchers should be setting those parameters up from the very beginning as well. Are they going to take anybody who agrees to interview? Are you looking for specific components? Like, are you just going to look for students who have positive attitudes about drug testing, or just negative attitudes? Are you just going to take an equal representation? What's going to be the criteria? And that should be laid out from the very beginning as well. So in a sequential exploratory design, what you're going to do is actually do the qualitative piece first, and then you'll do the quantitative data. So before we were talking about the explanatory design, so we were trying to explain what was going on. This we're just kind of exploring. We're trying to understand maybe the big picture instead. So you may just do a few interviews with students, kind of getting a general idea about what folks are thinking about the random drug testing, and then you're going to conduct a survey which would tie in some of those questions to look at the entire scale of attitudes about drug testing in general. Again, this is a very straightforward design. It's easy to implement and report back to.